My dog Buster. He's a big, goofy, lovable golden retriever, full of boundless energy, and I. We had this ritual, a sacred morning pact that started our day off right. Every single morning, rain or shine, cold or warm, at the crack of dawn, like 5:30 a.m. when the world was still hushed and gray and smelled of dew. We'd head out to the local woods, Oak Ridge Preserve. It's a big, sprawling place, mostly wild and untamed, with a network of winding dirt trails, thick undergrowth, and ancient, gnarled oak trees. At that hour, it was usually just us, the birds just starting to chirp their first tentative notes in the branches above. Maybe a fleeting glimpse of a deer or two if we were quiet and lucky, their white tails flashing in the gloom. It was our peaceful time, Buster off leash, bounding happily through the trees, nose to the ground, me just enjoying the quiet, the smell of damp earth and pine needles, the feeling of being alone with nature before the city fully woke up and the noise and stress of the day began. There were always those local stories, of course, the kind every town has about woods, vague, unsubstantiated tales of a hermit or a wild man who supposedly lived deep inside. It's unmapped sections or people getting lost on the confusing intersecting trails and seeing strange lights or hearing odd unidentifiable sounds. I never paid them much attention, just dismissed them as harmless campfire tales, local folklore. It started with Buster, actually. He's usually a pretty happy-go-lucky, generally fearless dog, scared of nothing much bigger than the roaring vacuum cleaner or the occasional clap of thunder. But one morning, on our usual familiar loop, a path we'd walked hundreds of times, he suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. Ears pricked high and alert, the fur bristling along his spine in a way I'd rarely seen, and let out this low, guttural, menacing growl, staring intently fixedly at a thick, dark clump of rhododendron bushes just off the trail about 20 feet into the woods. I couldn't see anything at all. No movement, no sound other than the gentle rustle of the wind in the leaves. "What is it, boy?" "What's in there? A squirrel?" I whispered, peering into the dense shadows, my hand instinctively going to his collar. He wouldn't budge, just kept growling that low, threatening rumble, a sound that vibrated through his chest, a sound I rarely ever heard from him. After a minute or so of this tense standoff with nothing visible, I managed to coax him along the path, but he kept looking back over his shoulder, uneasy, his tail tucked low instead of its usual happy wag. I figured maybe a raccoon or a fox, or even a stray cat was hiding in there, something that had spooked him more than usual. But it happened again a few days later, in a completely different spot on our route, this time near an old, fallen oak tree, its massive roots exposed like grasping claws. This time, he whined, a high-pitched, anxious, almost mournful sound, tucked his tail almost completely between his legs, and actively tried to pull me back the way we came, his eyes wide with something that looked unmistakably like fear. Again, I saw nothing, heard nothing out of the ordinary. This wasn't like Buster at all. He loved these woods. They were his happy place. Then I started finding things. Small, deliberately placed, completely out-of-place objects on the trail. In places I knew for a fact were clear the day before, because I walked that exact path every single morning with an observant eye. The first was a child's brightly colored plastic toy soldier, one of those little green army men, standing upright, almost at attention, on a prominent moss-covered tree stump right beside our path, a spot we always passed. Weird, I thought, or maybe a kid on a walk with their parents had dropped it the previous day. A few days later, in a different spot along the same trail, it was a single, perfectly ripe, unblemished red apple, sitting incongruously on a flat, gray rock, as if carefully placed there, not rolled or fallen. Then, a week or so after that, a small, neatly tied bundle of dried twigs and what looked like bird feathers, possibly from a jay or a crow, bound together with a piece of rough, natural-looking twine, left hanging from a low branch overhanging the path. These weren't random litter. They felt intentional, almost like some kind of strange, primitive trail markers or bizarre, unsettling offerings. Or more disturbingly, warnings. The feeling of being watched became almost constant, a heavy, oppressive sensation on my skin, like unseen eyes following my every move through the trees. I'd stop suddenly, listen intently, scan the surrounding woods, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever or whatever it was. Nothing. Just the wind sighing in the leaves, the distant, muffled sounds of the waking city. But Buster felt it too, I was absolutely sure of it. He'd stick much closer to my legs than usual, his usual joyful, bounding exploration of the undergrowth and exciting smells replaced by a nervous, darting vigilance. He'd often stop and sniff the air, a low, worried growl rumbling in his chest, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the dense, shadowy undergrowth. He was on edge, constantly, and it was making me deeply on edge too. I told my wife, Karen, about it, trying to sound more curious than concerned, but she knew me too well, saw the worry in my eyes. Something really weird is going on in Oak Ridge during our morning walks, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Buster's acting super strange, spooked all the time, and I keep finding these odd, deliberately placed things on the trail, like something out of a creepy movie. She listened patiently, but I could tell she thought I was being a bit dramatic. Maybe letting my imagination get the better of me, influenced by those old woods tales. Honey, dogs growl at squirrels and rabbits all the time. You know that? And people lose things in the woods, or kids leave their toys behind when they're playing. You probably just letting those old hermit stories and the early morning gloom get to you because you out there all alone so early. It's easy to get spooked when it's quiet and dark, but this wasn't just Buster acting strange. This was a fundamental, worrying change in my usually confident, happy-go-lucky dog's behavior, and the objects felt too deliberate, too ritualistic, too targeted to our specific path and routine. Was it the supposed hermit from the local tailies, a real person living off the grid? Was he trying to communicate with me, or warn me off what he considered his private territory? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone with a more modern, more unsettling, more malicious agenda? The wrongdoing here wasn't obvious, not yet, not in a way I could easily report to the police without sounding like a lunatic. But the feeling of being stalked, of my safe, familiar morning routine, being invaded and subtly, creepily manipulated, was terrifying. It was a psychological game, a slow burn war of nerves, and I didn't know the rules or the stakes, or even who my unseen opponent was. One morning, the object left on the path was more personal, more direct, and far more chilling than anything that had come before. It was a dog collar, not Buster's, thank God, but a small, worn, cracked leather collar. The kind a smaller dog, maybe a beagle or a terrier, might wear. It was laid out carefully, almost reverently, in the middle of the trail, right where I couldn't possibly miss it as the sun began to filter through the trees. There was no dog attached, no tags, no sign of a struggle nearby. Just the collar, empty and accusing and incredibly sinister. Buster went absolutely crazy when he saw it barking and whining and backing away from it, refusing to go near it, his hackles raised along his entire spine, display of fear and aggression I'd never witnessed from him before. That collar was a message. A clear, undeniable, terrifying message. I didn't know what it meant, not exactly. Was it a threat to Buster, implying he could be next. A warning to me to stay away from these woods. A sick trophy from another encounter this person had had with another dog or its owner. My mind reeled with horrible, sickening possibilities. I grabbed Buster's leash, clipped it on securely, and we got out of those woods as fast as our legs could carry us. I didn't even bother finishing our walk that day, or any day after, not in Oak Ridge Preserve. The sanctuary had become a place of menace. I did. When I told Karen about the collar, showing it to her, she finally looked truly scared. Her earlier skepticism vanishing completely, replaced by a look of horror. Okay, that's not normal, Mark, she admitted, her voice hushed and trembling slightly. That's really, really creepy and wrong. That's a threat. You need to call the park rangers or even the police right now. I reported all the incidents, the strange objects I'd found over the weeks, Buster's increasingly fearful behavior, and finally, the deeply disturbing collar. A park ranger came out, walked the trail with me a day later. We found nothing else out of the ordinary, of course. The collar was gone, as were any other items I might have missed. He listened politely enough, took some notes, said he'd increase patrols in the area, but I could tell he thought it was probably just some local weirdo with too much time on his hands, or kids messing around trying to be edgy and scare people. He didn't seem to grasp the escalating sense of menace, the psychological torment I'd felt, the clear implication of that collar. No actual crime has been committed here, sir, as far as we can tell. He reminded me a bit dismissively before heading off to his next call. No actual crime. Not yet, anyway. But I felt like I and Buster had been on the very verge of one. Someone was out there in those woods watching me, leaving these disturbing, personalized tokens, escalating their silent, creepy game. Why? What do they want? We stopped going to Oak Ridge Preserve for our morning walks immediately. We found a different park, much more open, much more populated, even at dawn, even though it was further away. And Buster didn't like it nearly as much. He missed his wild woods. The peace and solitude of our old ritual was gone, replaced by a lingering unease and a constant, weary vigilance. I never found out who was leaving those things in the woods or why they singled us out. Was it someone trying to scare dog walkers away from a particular part of the woods they were using for something illegal? A dumping ground for stolen goods, a clandestine meeting spot, a place to grow something they shouldn't be growing? Was it someone with a disturbed, unhealthy fixation on me or my dog, deriving some sick pleasure from our fear? Or was it somehow connected to those old, vague, unsettling stories about strange happenings and disappearances in Oak Ridge Preserve? Stories that now felt chillingly plausible? The not knowing is the worst part. The part that still gnaws at me sometimes late at night. The feeling that you were singled out, targeted, stalked by an unseen, unknown observer with unknown, but clearly unsettling and potentially dangerous intentions. And the deep frustration that because nothing actually happened, in a way that left bruises or broken bones or a clear police report, no one really believed the depth of the threat you felt, the reality of the fear you lived with for weeks. It makes you realize that sometimes the most effective way to terrorize someone isn't with overt violence or loud threats, but with a series of small, inexplicable, deeply personal acts that make them question their own safety, their own sanity in the places they once loved and felt secure. And that sometimes your dog, with its primal, uncorrupted instincts, knows a hell of a lot more about the unseen world and its hidden dangers than you do. You just have to learn to listen to them and to your own gut before it's too late. This story actually happened to a woman I used to work with, Linda. She was a serious swimmer, the kind who found a sort of zen in doing lap after lap. Her favorite thing was to be the absolute first person at the Northwood Community Pool when it opened at the crack of dawn. 5. I'm sharp. All year round. It was an outdoor pool, but heated in the colder months. A real local gem. Linda said the water at that hour was always still and perfect, like a sheet of undisturbed turquoise glass reflecting the pale, tentative morning sky. The usual daytime chaos of splashing kids and chattering adults hadn't yet arrived to break the spell. It was just her, the quiet, rhythmic lapping of the water against the tiles, and the steady, meditative pull of her strokes. Shadi heard some of the older ladies who came for the later aqua aerobics class whisper in the changing rooms about things sometimes being out of place in the early mornings if they ever arrived a bit too early. Or a creepy feeling in the women's locker room at odd hours, but Linda, being a rational, down-to-earth social worker, always put it down to pre-coffee. Jitters, vivid imaginations, or just the general weirdness of being in a large, empty public space before the rest of the world woke up. It started with small, almost unnoticeable things. The kind of things that are easily dismissed if you're not paying close attention. Linda was meticulous about her routine, a creature of deeply ingrained habit. She always used the same locker in the women's changing room. Number 23, because it was at the end of a row and felt a bit more private. She always placed her towel, a distinctive bright yellow one her niece had given her, on the same numbered hook by the poolside. Hook number 7, closest to her preferred lap lane. One morning, she arrived, got her key from the sleepy, indifferent attendant, a young guy named Kevin, who usually just waved her in with a grunt and immediately went back to scrolling on his phone or reading a dog-eared paperback novel, and went to her locker. It was already slightly ajar. Not wide open, just not fully latched, as if someone had opened it and not quite bothered to close it properly again. She was absolutely sure she'd locked it securely with her personal padlock the previous morning. She always double-checked that kind of thing. Odd. She cautiously checked inside. Nothing seemed to be missing. Nothing new had been added. She dismissed it. Maybe she hadn't locked it properly after all, just this once. Everyone makes mistakes, even meticulous people. A few days later, she got to her usual poolside spot after changing. Her hook, number 7, was empty, but her towel, that distinctive bright yellow one, was neatly folded on the nearby plastic bench a few feet away. A bench she never, ever used. Again, weird. Had she left it there yesterday by mistake, in a moment of post-swim distraction? Unlikely she was such a creature of habit, but possible, she supposed. Then she started noticing a still wet patch on the cool, gray tiles by the edge of the deep end, right where someone might stand for a moment before diving in, even though she was, supposedly, the very first person to enter the pool area that day. Kevin, the attendant, was always still in his little office by the main gate at this hour, not yet out doing his poolside safety checks. Or she'd catch the faint lingering scent of a different unfamiliar brand of chlorine. Or perhaps more disturbingly, a distinct man's shower gel or cologne in the women's changing room when she first entered, a scent that definitely wasn't there when she left the previous day, and certainly shouldn't be in the women's section at any time. These weren't just things out of place anymore. This was mounting, undeniable evidence of someone else's very recent, unauthorized presence. Someone who shouldn't have been there before the official opening time. Linda started to feel a persistent prickle of unease, a feeling she couldn't quite shake, like a splinter under her skin. This wasn't just her imagination. Someone was getting into the pool area and possibly into the women's locker room before it officially opened, or perhaps staying very late after it closed and leaving just before she arrived. But who? And more importantly, why? She mentioned it to the morning attendant, Kevin, trying to sound casual, not accusatory, not wanting to sound like a hysterical woman. Hey, Kevin, have you noticed anything weird in the mornings? Like maybe someone's been in the pool area before us or in the changing rooms. Things seem a bit off. Kevin just yawned, stretching elaborately, clearly not a morning person. Nah, Miss Thompson, can't say I have. Just the overnight cleaning crew. Sometimes they finish up a bit late, around 4:30 a.m., I think. Probably just them moving stuff around, or leaving a wet spot from hosing down the deck. They're not supposed to use the pool itself, but who knows what they get up to when no one's watching, right? Low pay, weird hours. He didn't seem concerned in the slightest, already turning back to his phone, dismissing her. But the cleaning crew, as far as Linda knew from previous inquiries, was a team of women, and they wouldn't be in the women's locker room, leaving the scent of men's cologne, nor would they be opening specific padlockers. Linda started to suspect something more deliberate, more intrusive was going on. Was it a male staff member with a master key? Someone with unrestricted access, using the pool for a private, unauthorized early swim, and maybe ducking into the wrong changing room by mistake, or more chillingly, not by mistake? Annoying, a definite breach of rules, but not necessarily sinister in itself. Or was it someone else entirely? Someone from outside, someone with a less innocent, more disturbing purpose. The hushed whispers from the aqua aerobics ladies about a creepy feeling and things not being right, and the early hours started to echo in her mind with a new, unwelcome, chilling resonance. The potential wrongdoing here was trespassing. Certainly, a clear violation of facility rules and security. But the underlying unspoken fear was of the unknown intent behind that trespassing. Was this person just enjoying a quiet, solitary swim, breaking the rules for a bit of peace and quiet before the crowds arrived? Or were they there for other, darker reasons, watching, waiting, setting something up, like hidden cameras in the changing rooms or showers? The thought made Linda feel exposed, vulnerable, her safe haven violated. One morning, determined to get to the bottom of it, or at least ease her own mind by proving herself wrong, Linda arrived a few minutes earlier than her usual super early time. As she walked quietly through the still dark, silent parking lot towards the pool gate, she saw a figure, cloaked in the pre-dawn shadows, slip away from the back service entrance of the pool complex, an entrance that was supposed to be securely locked and alarmed at all times, used only by maintenance and emergency services. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and moved quickly, almost furtively, disappearing around the corner of the building before she could get a good look or call out. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't the cleaning crew. They always used the main entrance, and their van was nowhere in sight. This was someone deliberately trying not to be seen. She went straight to Kevin, who was just unlocking the main gate, looking even sleepier than usual. Kevin, I just saw someone leaving through the back service door. Someone who isn't staff, I'm sure of it. A man in dark clothes. Kevin looked mildly surprised. Then his usual skepticism kicked in. You sure, Miss Thompson? It's pretty dark out still. Probably just one of the late shift cleaners forgetting something and using the back way out to save time. They do that sometimes if they're rerunning late and don't want to walk all the way around. No, Kevin, this was different, Linda insisted, frustrated by his casual, almost automatic dismissal of her concerns. They were clearly trying not to be seen. They were sneaking. Frustrated by his consistent lack of concern and his unwillingness to even consider her fears, Linda decided she had to take matters into her own hands to get some kind of proof that would make them listen. The next morning, she came even earlier, a good 20 minutes before her usual arrival, parking her car where she had a discreet but clear view of that back service entrance from across the street. She waited, engine off, lights off, feeling like a private detective in a bad movie, her heart thumping with a mixture of fear and determination. Sure enough, about 10 minutes before she usually arrived, she saw him. A man, not in any staff uniform, slipped out of the service door. He was carrying a small, waterproof-looking gym bag. He looked around furtively, checking the parking lot carefully, then walked quickly, almost guiltily, towards a dark-colored sedan parked in the deepest shadows at the far end of the lot. Got in and drove away without turning on his headlights until he was well out of the parking lot and onto the main road. It was one of the other very early morning lap swimmers, a quiet, intense-looking man she vaguely recognized. Someone who usually arrived a few minutes after her and always kept to himself, never making eye contact. What on earth was he doing in the pool complex? And specifically, if the lingering scent of cologne was any indication. The women's areas before it officially opened to members, using a locked service entrance he shouldn't have access to. Was he the source of the open locker, the moved towel, the creepy feeling the other women had reported? Was he just sneaking in for extra early, completely solitary swim, wanting the entire pool to himself before anyone else arrived? Or was his purpose far more sinister? Was he a voyeur, perhaps setting up or retrieving hidden cameras in the women's locker room or showers? Or just getting some perverse thrill from being in a forbidden private space when he knew women would soon be arriving? Linda, now armed with a specific identification and a license plate number she'd hastily scribbled down, reported what she saw to the pool manager later that day. A no-nonsense, efficient woman named Diane. She described the man, his car, the repeated strange incidents she'd experienced, and her early morning stackout. Diane listened intently, her expression growing grimmer and more concerned with each detail Linda provided. She promised to investigate immediately, check the service door lock for tampering, and review any security footage they had. The man wasn't there the next few mornings. Linda looked for his car in the parking lot, but it was gone. Then, about a week later, Diane quietly informed Linda that the man's membership had been summarily terminated due to a serious breach of facility rules and codes of conduct. She wouldn't, or couldn't, give Linda any more specific details, citing privacy concerns and ongoing internal reviews. But her grim, appreciative expression and the firm handshake she gave Linda spoke volumes. Linda never found out exactly what that man had been doing in the women's locker room and pool area before hours. But she was pretty sure it wasn't just an innocent early swim. The feeling of her private space, her routine, her sanctuary, being invaded by an unseen, unknown presence with potentially perverted intentions was deeply unsettling and left a lasting chill that took a long time to fade. When she cautiously told some of her closer friends about it after the fact, they mostly said things like, well, at least he wasn't like in the locker room at the same time you were there, right? He didn't actually do anything to you. Probably just wanted the whole pool to himself. The selfish jerk. They didn't understand the profound violation, the psychological fear that comes from knowing someone has been where they shouldn't, perhaps, or worse, when you thought you were completely alone and safe. It made her realize that even the most serene, early morning routines can be tainted by someone else's hidden, creepy agenda. And that sometimes the first visitor to the empty pool isn't you. And their reasons for being there are anything but pure or innocent. It made her much more careful about where and when she went for her morning swim. I used to be an avid early morning cyclist, man. My favorite route, my sanctuary, was this old, converted canal towpath that wound its way out of the city for about 15, maybe 20 miles. It was mostly flat, running through patches of dense woodland, alongside quiet, mist-covered fields and past forgotten, crumbling locks. At sunrise, say 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, it was usually completely, blissfully deserted. Just me, my bike, the birds starting to sing their hearts out, and that incredible, profound sense of peace you only get when the rest of the world is still asleep. That's why what started happening, freaked me out so much. It shattered that peace completely, tainted it. It began about 2 months into my regular routine on that path. I started noticing another cyclist, also an early bird, which wasn't unheard of, but rare on this particular slightly out of the way trail, which, is fine in itself. It's a public path after all. But this guy, he was different. He was always dressed head to toe in dark, almost tactical looking unbranded cycling gear, black or dark gray, including a full face helmet that obscured his entire head and dark wrap-around Oakley-style glasses, so I could never ever see his face. Not even a hint of his features or skin color. And he rode this sleek, expensive-looking, matte black mountain bike with no reflectors, no lights, no bell, nothing to make it easily visible or announce his presence. He was like a ninja on two wheels, a silent, dark wraith. The first few times I saw him, he'd usually appear suddenly almost out of nowhere from one of the smaller intersecting dirt trails that led off into the dense woods, merging onto the towpath just ahead of me, or more unnervingly, just behind me, as if he'd timed his arrival perfectly. He never made a sound, no friendly morning, or even a cursory nod of acknowledgement that other cyclists usually give. He'd just be there, silently pacing me, sometimes a little too close for comfort on the narrow path, his breathing barely audible, if at all, over the whir of our tires on the gravel. Or he'd overtake me with a sudden silent, powerful burst of speed, then slow down again just ahead, as if waiting for me to catch up, or as if he wanted to stay just in my line of sight. It was incredibly unnerving, a subtle kind of psychological game. I tried to be friendly at first, the usual cyclist etiquette. "Morning!" I'd call out, trying to sound cheerful. No response, not even a twitch of his helmeted head. Just that silent, focused, almost mechanical presence. I started to feel like I was being studied or sized up, like a bug under a microscope. The towpath was narrow in many places, with the murky, still canal on one side and thick, impenetrable woods or steep, muddy embankments on the other. Not a lot of room to maneuver if someone decided to get aggressive or block your way. Then his behavior got weirder, more pointed, more overtly intimidating. Sometimes I'd come around a blind bend in the path, one with overgrown bushes obscuring the view, and he'd be there, stopped, right in the absolute middle of the narrow path, his bike angled slightly, effectively blocking it. I'd have to brake hard, skidding on the loose gravel, or swerve sharply onto the rough, uneven verge to avoid a collision. He wouldn't move, wouldn't even look at me, until the very last second. Then he'd just silently, slowly push off and continue on his way. No apology, no acknowledgement that he'd nearly caused an accident. It felt like a deliberate power play, a calculated act of intimidation, a test of my nerve. Other times, and this was even creepier, he'd follow me. I'd try to vary my pace, speed up significantly, slow down to a crawl. He'd mirror me perfectly, always maintaining that same unnerving distance, maybe 20 or 30 feet behind. A silent, dark, persistent shadow. If I stopped to adjust my gear or take a drink from my water bottle, he'd stop too further back down. The trail just outside of easy conversational distance, just waiting, watching a dark silhouette against the gray morning light. The hair on the back of my neck would stand out. This wasn't just another cyclist sharing the path. This felt like I was being stalked, systematically. I told my wife, Sarah, about it, trying to make light of it, but also needing to share the unease. There's this really creepy cyclist on the towpath in the mornings, I said. He just sort of appears out of nowhere and follows me or blocks the path. Never says a word. Dressed all in black like some kind of cycling assassin. She frowned, concerned. That's weird, Mark. Really weird. Maybe he's just socially awkward. Or one of those super focused athletes who doesn't like distractions. She tried to be reassuring, as always. As long as he's not actually threatening you, honey, maybe just try to ignore him. Or if he makes you that uncomfortable, maybe find a different route for a while. But it was threatening, in a subtle, deeply psychological way. The not knowing his intent, the constant feeling of being watched, of being toyed with, of being tested. It completely ruined my rides. The peace and solitude I used to find on that towpath was gone, replaced by annoying, persistent anxiety, a constant nervous looking over my shoulder. One morning, it escalated to a point where I couldn't ignore it or rationalize it away anymore. I was on a particularly remote stretch of the path, woods pressing in close on both sides, no houses or roads visible for miles. He appeared from a side trail, as usual, silent as a ghost, and fell in behind me. This time, he was closer, way too close. I could hear the distinct hiss of his tires on the damp earth, the faint, almost imperceptible click of his gears as he matched my pace. I sped up, trying to put some distance between us. He sped up, effortlessly. I slowed down, hoping he'd pass. He stayed right on my tail, almost drafting me. Then, as we approached a narrow section of the path with a low-hanging tree branch that forced you to duck, he suddenly accelerated. A powerful surge, trying to pass me on the inside, on the canal side, where there was barely enough room for one bike, let alone two abreast. He deliberately brushed hard against my handlebars. I wobbled violently, fighting for control, nearly went straight into the murky, cold water of the canal. I yelled out, a mixture of shock and anger. "Hey, watch it, man. What the hell are you doing?" He didn't say a word, not one. He just pulled slightly ahead, then slowed again, turning his helmeted head to look back at me. I couldn't see his eyes behind the dark glasses, but I could feel his gaze, cold and appraising. It felt like a challenge. Or a warning. Or maybe, just maybe, he was disappointed I hadn't fallen in. That was it for me. This wasn't just awkward or aggressive anymore. This was dangerous. This was a direct physical act that could have resulted in serious injury. I turned my bike around on the narrow path and pedaled back towards the city as fast as my legs could carry me. Not even caring if he followed, just needing to get away from him, from that place. He didn't follow, or at least I didn't see him again that day. My heart was pounding the whole way back. When I told my wife about him nearly knocking me into the canal, she was much more concerned, angry even. But still, when I talked about it later with some friends, there was that lingering doubt in their voices. "Are you sure it wasn't just an accident, Mark? Maybe he just misjudged the space? Or his wheels slipped?" One asked. "No," I said, with a certainty that came from pure terror. It felt deliberate, the way he looked back at me. It was a threat. No one else I mentioned it to really got it either, not the full extent of the creepiness, the weeks of silent intimidation leading up to it. Just some aggressive cyclist, dude. The trails are full of those alpha male types, another friend said. You probably just pissed him off somehow without realizing it. Maybe cut him off earlier. But I knew it was more than that. The consistency of his appearance, the all-black, anonymous gear, the silent intimidation. It felt like a predator testing its prey, enjoying the fear, seeing how far he could push it. Was he planning to rob me out there on that deserted trail, assault me, or just scare me off his territory for some unknown reason? I'll never know for sure. I stopped using that towpath immediately. Found a busier, less scenic, more polluted road route for my morning rides. It's not the same. I genuinely miss the peace and beauty of the canal. But I don't miss that silent, dark cyclist. That constant feeling of being hunted, of being a target. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, a silent, menacing shadow on that deserted trail, waiting for his next unsuspecting victim. And I wonder if anyone would believe them either, until it was too late. It makes you realize that danger doesn't always shout or wear a scary mask. Sometimes it just pedals silently and patiently behind you, waiting for its moment to strike. And sometimes the most terrifying thing is the silence of the predator.